Okay, so which are some of the possible issues that could come up during a transaction that could maybe throw a monkey wrench into the whole process? So number one would be the inspection. So once we sign a contract, the buyer will typically have a 7-day inspection period. When I'm representing a seller, I usually ask we negotiate for the buyer to have 7 days to do an inspection, no more than that. I want the buyer to be able to move forward diligently. Again, when I'm helping a seller, I want the buyer to be able to move forward diligently through the process, give them the right to do an inspection as quickly as they possibly can, and decide whether they're still interested or not. I don't like to have my sellers waste their time and have buyers tie us up during this whole process. So during that time, during those first 7 days, the buyer will have the right to do an inspection. And during that inspection, depending on the buyer will have a property inspector come out and do a detailed inspection. Now, a buyer may or may not hire a licensed and professional inspector, but assuming that they do, that inspector will typically provide them with a very detailed report with pictures, sometimes video, that would inspect the roof, the electrical, the plumbing, the AC, the appliances, the windows, the gutters, they'll inspect everything, and it's usually a very detailed report. Now, if the property, every property in my experience has some type of issue, unless it's absolutely brand new, and even those still have some type of issue. So, finding something during the inspection is not necessarily a deal breaker. What is important is about the seller being realistic about the condition of the property and the price that we're asking. So, assuming that we're asking a reasonable, realistic price for the market at that moment, that we're competing with other properties, etc., as long as it's a realistic price, and whatever comes out in the inspection isn't a major situation, then we usually move through the inspection pretty quickly. So that would be the first step, the first possible obstacle possibly, which is the inspection, right? Let's make sure that nothing crazy shows up during the inspection. Now, if as a seller, maybe you're not aware, but you realize the buyer does an inspection and it turns out that, I don't know, the roof is leaking, right? And it's already at the end of its life expectancy. Maybe you didn't realize it, the buyer didn't know, or something like that. Then that may be a point for us to have to negotiate or maybe discount the price. Sometimes, not always, but the inspection is basically one of the steps that we have to overcome. The next other step is the appraisal. For instance, let's say that we are asking $500,000 for a property, and the appraisal comes in for 400. I'm being ridiculous and extreme. That would be a problem, right? Typically, when we go to list a property and we're helping you sell a property, we are going to discuss the asking price and the likely appraised value and what the market is doing in that moment in terms of whether buyers are actually willing to pay above the appraised value or not. So that might be an issue, and we'll have a conversation around that. Typically, the appraisals tend to fall behind a little bit by a few months because the appraisals are based on the most recently closed sales of the past, right? And so they don't always keep up with market value unless we're in a very stable market, right? If the market is kind of like this, then the appraisals tend to match the market value and the sales price and the contract price of the market. So we can have a conversation around that as well. The other step is the insurability, and it's basically that also going back to the inspection. If something happens during the inspection that basically makes the buyer aware of the fact that maybe the roof is in bad condition, it's at the end of its life expectancy, and the property is not going to be insurable, and the buyer needs financing, then if the buyer can't secure insurance, if the property can't be insured, then the buyer is not going to be able to secure financing. So typically properties that are uninsurable because of some physical condition, they're also not financeable. So those properties we can only sell to cash buyers. But again, we can have a conversation around that specifically if that's an issue. But insurability is definitely an issue for buyers who need financing mostly because of the condition of the roof, sometimes because of shutters, right? The difference in South Florida between a property that has shutters or doesn't have shutters, it can be significant in terms of insurance. And so depending on the type of buyer, the buyer may simply say, I can just buy impact windows after the closing. Okay, great. But if it's a first-time buyer who's limited on cash, that may be a deal breaker for them. So we'll address practically most of these issues, if not all of these issues, between you as a seller and myself in advance so we can have the right expectations, right? And then the last issue that might come up is the condition of the title, right? Are there any issues with title or permits? So for instance, if there's, let's say that you are selling your property, but the title is currently held under your name and a relative's name, right? Maybe your brother or your cousin or your mother or somebody else, and that person is not around and they can't be found, we're not going to be able to sell because we need both people's signatures. If, for example, the property has an open permit or a violation, a code enforcement violation with the city, that might be an issue as well. Now, all these issues are workable. There's always a solution to these issues. It's just something that we're going to have to address. So anyway, I know this is a lot of info, but if you have questions about this or anything else, I'm happy to clarify, and we'll most definitely talk about any of these issues in detail if they happen to pertain to you. So anyway, hope you find this helpful, and I will see you in another video.